My name is Sloan Whitfield, and I showed up to my father's retirement party in a black dress I'd bought on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, wearing my grandmother's pearl earrings, ready to be a good daughter. I had driven 3 hours from my apartment in the Lincoln Park neighborhood to the North Shore suburb where my father and his wife Linda had lived for 11 years. I had taken Friday off work, which was not a small thing given where we were in the fiscal quarter. I had bought a gift, a custom leather portfolio embossed with his initials, from a shop on Oak Street in Chicago, the kind of gift that takes thought and takes money, and I had it wrapped in the passenger seat of my car when I pulled into the long driveway of the house on Sheridan Road in Winnetka. The party was already underway. 60, maybe 70 people. Colleagues from his 32 years at the firm, neighbors, people from his club, Linda's friends who had blended into my father's life the way Linda herself had blended into it 11 years ago, thoroughly and completely and with very little space left for what had been there before. What had been there before was me and my mother. My mother has lived in Cincinnati for 9 years, since the divorce that followed my father's decision to start over, and she is fine, genuinely fine, the kind of fine that takes real work to arrive at and that I respect her enormously for. She remarried 2 years ago, a man named David who teaches high school history and makes her laugh, and when I visit them at their house in Hyde Park in Cincinnati the air is lighter than I ever remember the air being when I was growing up. I mention all of this because it is context for the room I walked into on a Saturday evening in September. My relationship with Linda has always had the specific difficulty of a relationship neither party chose and both have managed with varying success. She is 58, territorial, with a sharpness around anything she perceives as a claim on what she considers hers, my father, his attention, his professional world, the house on Sheridan Road. I have spent 11 years being a presence she tolerates on good days and resents on others. I am, to Linda, the proof that my father had a life before her. She has never been comfortable with that, and she expresses the discomfort through small exclusions and careful positioning, the way my name is or isn't mentioned at social events, the way visits are scheduled, the way information reaches me through my father rather than directly. Nothing dramatic enough to confront, just the steady low-pressure system of a woman who has decided I am not welcome and has been managing that feeling for a decade. I went to the party anyway. 32 years at the same firm is a real thing. And I had told myself, on 94 North through the Chicago traffic, that I was going to be the bigger person, which is what I have told myself about this situation for most of my adult life. I found my father near the bar. He saw me and did the complicated thing his face does, glad I'm there and anxious about Linda's reaction simultaneously. He hugged me briefly. I gave him the gift. He said, "You came," which was both statement and relief. Linda appeared at his shoulder. She looked at the gift, at me, at the room she had planned over months, the caterer, the florals, the string quartet in the corner. She said, lightly, "You made it." I said, "I wouldn't have missed it." She smiled and moved my father away. I got a drink and did what you do at parties where you know almost no one. I was pleasant to the people who introduced themselves, said appropriate things about my father's career, moved through the room with the controlled ease of someone who has learned to perform comfortable sociality in uncomfortable situations. The whispers I heard first in the hallway near the powder room, when I had stepped away from the main room for a few minutes. 2 women, Linda's friends, in the low-register conversation of people who are not trying hard enough to be quiet. One of them said, "Is that the daughter?" The other said something I couldn't fully hear. The first one said, "God. Cold as ice. You can tell she resents being here." I stood in the hallway and breathed. I thought. I drove 3 hours. I took a day off work. I bought a leather portfolio embossed with his initials from a shop on Oak Street. I am wearing my grandmother's pearls. I went back into the main room. 40 minutes later, I was standing near the window that faced the lake. The house on Sheridan Road has a view of Lake Michigan that my father purchased with 30 years of billing hours, a view that is genuinely extraordinary, the water going blue-gray in the September evening light, when Linda came to stand beside me. She had a glass of champagne and the particular posture of a person who has decided to do something and is doing it now. She said, loudly enough that the people nearest us could hear. "I think we need to talk about why you're here." I said, "I'm here for my father's retirement party." She said, "This is a private event for people who actually support him. Not people who've spent years creating problems." She paused, and then she said, in the tone of someone who has been waiting to say a thing for a long time and has finally found the occasion. "Security." She actually said it to a man standing near the door, one of the catering company's event staff who had apparently been framed as security in her mind. "Can you remove this useless girl?" The room near us went quiet. I looked at my father. He was across the room. He had heard. I could see it in his face, the way he had gone still, the conflict in his expression between the knowledge that he should intervene and the long habit of not intervening when Linda did things like this. He did not move. I set my glass down on the table next to the window. I picked up my coat from the chair where I had left it. I walked to my father and I said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "Happy retirement, Dad." And then I walked out. I drove back to Chicago on 94 South with the radio off. The drive usually takes 3 hours. It took me 2 and 40 minutes, which means I was driving faster than I should have been, which I understand in retrospect but which I cannot entirely regret because I needed the car to be moving, I needed to be covering ground, I needed the physical fact of distance accumulating between me and the house on Sheridan Road. By the time I crossed back into the city and the skyline came into view over the highway, the clarity that had been building since I walked out of the party had solidified into something I recognized as decision. Not the kind of decision you make in anger and regret the next morning. The kind you've been approaching for years and have finally arrived at, and that feels, when you get there, not like a break but like a completion. I got home to my apartment in Lincoln Park at 11:15. I called my attorney, Elena Vasquez, at 11:20. Elena works at a firm on North Wacker Drive in Chicago, and she is accustomed to calls from me at hours that are not business hours, because I am accustomed to doing things when the thinking is clear rather than when the calendar says it's appropriate. She answered on the third ring. I said, "Elena, I need to make some changes to the trust structure. Tonight if possible, or first thing tomorrow morning." She said, "Talk to me." I talked to her. I need to explain the $17 million, because it is the fact of the story that will seem most improbable if I don't give it context. I am 34 years old. I founded a company at 27, out of a one-bedroom apartment on Roscoe Street in Chicago's Lakeview neighborhood, with a co-founder named Marcus and $17,000 of combined savings, a subscription software product for small and mid-sized law firms that automated specific workflows in client management and billing. This is not a glamorous idea, and it was not a glamorous early period, 18 months of not paying myself, of Marcus and I working out of coffee shops on North Clark Street when we needed to leave the apartment just to stay sane, of sales calls that went nowhere and a few that went somewhere, and the slow accumulation of a customer base that eventually crossed the threshold from precarious to viable. The company grew methodically, without the dramatic venture-backed explosion that makes for better narrative but produces worse outcomes. We raised a single modest series from a Chicago-based firm, grew our team carefully, expanded our product based on what our customers actually needed rather than what we thought would be impressive to investors. When we were acquired, 3 years ago, by a larger legal technology company with offices in Chicago's River North neighborhood, the outcome was real. My share of the proceeds, after taxes and attorney's fees and all the costs of a transaction of that size, was approximately $17 million. I had been quietly managing and growing that for 3 years under Elena's guidance, with the kind of careful attention that my grandmother had modeled for me in the years before she died, my grandmother, whose pearl earrings I had worn to the party. My father did not know the full picture. He knew I had built something and sold it. He did not know the number, because I had not told him and he had not asked with the specificity that would have told me he was actually interested rather than performing interest. Linda certainly did not know. They knew I was a founder. They didn't know what the founding had produced. The trust had been part of the estate planning Elena and I had done in the years since the acquisition. A specific structure with specific beneficiary designations that I had thought carefully about and that had included, until approximately midnight on a Saturday in September, provisions that would have benefited my father. I sat at my kitchen table at 11:45 going through the trust document while Elena talked me through each section. The modifications were not complicated, just significant. The beneficiary provisions for my father's portion. Removed. Restructured to the charitable foundation I had been funding for 2 years, legal aid services for low-income clients in Cook County, connected to a clinic at DePaul University's law school on North Kenmore Avenue, work my grandmother had cared about and that I had continued in her name. Elena said, at around 12:30, "This is final and it's complete." "You know that once we file the amendment," I said. "I know." She said, "Okay. I'll have the paperwork ready to file at 9 Monday morning." I said, "Elena." She said, "Yes." I said, "File it now. There's an e-filing system." A pause. She said, "Sloan, it's 12:30 in the morning." I said, "I'm aware. The system is online 24 hours. Another pause. Then. "Give me 20 minutes. I sat at my kitchen table and looked out at the Lincoln Park Street, which was quiet at that hour in the particular way of Chicago residential neighborhoods on a Saturday night, a few people walking, the distant sound of something on North Clark, the city doing what it does in the hours that belong mostly to the city itself. Elena called back at 12:52. She said, "Filed." I said, "Thank you." I went to bed. My phone was on the charger on my nightstand, and by the time I woke up at 7:15 on Sunday morning it had done things while I slept. 62 missed calls. My father, beginning at approximately 1 in the morning, which meant someone had found out quickly, which meant the trust notification had gone to an address that was checked even in the middle of the night, which told me something about the level of attention being paid. My father, repeating, for hours. Linda's number, which I had not saved but which I recognized from the handful of times she had called me over the years. A number I didn't recognize that turned out, when I looked it up, to be a law firm in the Loop District of Chicago. And a text message, timestamped 1:17 a.m., from a contact identified as Arthur Klein attorney that said, "M.S. Whitfield, I represent your father regarding certain estate and trust matters. We've become aware of a significant action taken tonight that requires immediate discussion. Please contact our office. We have a significant issue that needs to be addressed urgently." I read it once. I read it again. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. I made coffee. I stood in my kitchen in my apartment in Lincoln Park, watching the Sunday morning light come in through the east-facing window, and I drank my coffee and I thought about my grandmother's pearl earrings, which I had taken off when I got home and placed in their case on my dresser. Then I picked up my phone and I replied to Arthur Klein. What I typed was, "Good morning, Mr. Klein. My attorney is Elena Vasquez at Vasquez & Partners on North Wacker Drive. She handles all matters related to my estate and trust structure and will be happy to speak with you during business hours Monday through Friday. I hope you have a good Sunday." I sent it. I finished my coffee. At 9:15, the buzzer for my apartment building went off. I looked at the intercom camera. My father was standing outside on the sidewalk, which meant he had driven from Winnetka, an hour in Sunday morning traffic, to stand on a sidewalk in Lincoln Park at 9:15 in the morning. Linda was with him. They were both still in the clothes from the party. My father looked exhausted. Linda looked like a woman who has calculated a situation and is not satisfied with the calculation. I pressed the intercom. I said, "Dad." He said, "Sloan. Please. Let us come up." I said, "I'll come down. I want to be accurate about what happened on the sidewalk outside my building on a Sunday morning in September, because it is the part of this that matters most and that I want to remember correctly." My father looked at me with the expression of a man who has been awake all night and who knows, in the specific way you know things when they are finally undeniable, that something significant has changed. Not the trust, not just the trust. Something older and more fundamental that the trust modification had made visible. He said, "What you did," I said, "was legal, fully within my rights, and done on the advice of my attorney." He said, "Sloan, last night," I said, "last night your wife had security remove me from your party. In front of your colleagues and your friends. She called me useless." Linda said, "That's not, I was just," I said, "Linda." And then I said nothing else, because I looked at her with the look I have learned to use in rooms where I am the person with the most information and I want that to be understood, and she stopped. I looked at my father. I said, "Dad. I love you. That is a fact that has survived 11 years of being managed out of your house and off your guest lists and treated like a problem your wife needs solving. I came to your retirement party because I love you. I drove 3 hours and took a day off work and bought you a gift and wore grandma's earrings because I love you." He was very still. I said, "I am 34 years old and I built something real and I have been careful with it and I have made decisions about it that I am at peace with. The decision I made last night is one of them. It has nothing to do with punishing you. It has to do with me finally being honest about what I can and cannot continue to extend toward a situation that doesn't change." He said, "The money," I said, "is mine. It was always mine. I earned it. What I choose to do with it is my decision, and I have made it." Linda said, "Arthur says there may be grounds," I said. "Arthur can call Elena Vasquez Monday morning. Elena will explain, very clearly and with full legal documentation, that there are no grounds." My father looked at me for a long moment. In that look was everything complicated about the relationship, the love that was real, the failure that was also real, the years of choosing the easier thing, the face of a man who understands that a bill has come due that he cannot argue with because he knows what he owes it for. He said, "I should have said something last night." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry." I stood on the sidewalk and looked at my father and thought about the drive home on 94 South with the radio off and the skyline coming into view and the clarity that had been building. I thought about Elena's voice on the phone at 12:52 saying filed. I thought about the pearl earrings in their case on my dresser. I said, "I know you are." I said, "I need some time, Dad." That's the honest answer. I'm not cutting you off. I'm not done with you. But I need some time where the terms of our relationship are not set by Linda's comfort level with my existence. He looked at Linda. Linda was quiet for the first time I could remember in 11 years of knowing her. I said, "I'm going to go back upstairs. Elena will be available Monday. I'd suggest you let Arthur handle it professionally and let me and you have a different conversation, separately, when we're both ready." I went back inside. It has been 4 months since the Sunday morning on the sidewalk outside my Lincoln Park building. My father and I have spoken 6 times since then. Not easy conversations, not fully resolved conversations, but real ones, the kind that require something from both people rather than the managed performances we had been having for years. He told me, in the third of those conversations, that Linda had not known about the trust or its scale and that her behavior at the party was not, he paused a long time here, not something he had sanctioned. He said it in a way that suggested he was finally looking at something he had been not looking at for a while. I did not tell him what to do with that. That is not my situation to manage. The foundation has been funded at a level that has made a real difference to the DePaul Legal Clinic and to the work they do in Cook County. I went to a donor event at the law school on North Kenmore Avenue in November and sat in a room with the clinic's attorneys and their clients and felt the specific satisfaction of money doing work that my grandmother would have recognized as worth doing. My apartment in Lincoln Park has a second bedroom that I have been thinking about converting into a proper office. The company I am building now, a second one, in a different sector, because apparently this is what I do, is at the stage that requires long uninterrupted hours and a door I can close, and the kitchen table is no longer quite cutting it. On a clear day in October I drove up to Winnetka on a Saturday afternoon and sat in my car on Sheridan Road looking at the lake, which does what it does in October, goes a deep cold blue, the light flat and perfect, the kind of view that costs 30 years of billing hours and that is genuinely worth looking at. I didn't go to the house. I wasn't ready for that yet and I didn't pretend to be. I drove back to Chicago on 94 South. The skyline came into view over the highway the way it always does, that particular moment when the buildings emerge above the flatland and the lake makes itself known on the right and the whole thing just resolves into the city, fully itself. I turned the radio on. I drove home.